good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to the amazing panel that we have lined up right now, targeting the funding challenge, but really framing it differently, breaking the rules from startup to scale up. And I'm excited to have really an amazing representation across the globe here from Africa, CEO of a Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. We have Harriet Khataba, Kalsoom Lakhani coming from Pakistan, I2I Ventures, Kathryn Wortsman, Amplify Capital coming from Canada, and of course myself based in DC, but Malaysian, true and true. Here to talk a little bit about the current landscape of funding. There's been a lot of talk of how women have been disproportionately affected through the pandemic. And we've heard this time and time again from women leaving the workforce to them also being affected from a funding perspective. And today we really want to unpack that and talk a little bit about what are the challenges here and what are the opportunities that we're seeing across the globe, from Canada to Pakistan, across different sectors and verticals, and what we can do here. So let's get started and really dive deep into some of these amazing women who have been breaking the rules in their own different ways to chart themselves for success. And I want to start with Kalsoom. Kalsoom, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us. Paint a little bit of a landscape for us in terms of what you're seeing on the ground. What are you concerned about, what worries you, but what excites you as well?
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to be on this panel today. So yeah, obviously my lens of where I work, also as a general partner for a venture capital fund, the only female founded VC fund in Pakistan, as well as I've been operating in the startup ecosystem in Pakistan for about 10 years. Just to give a sense of, why this is important and interesting, in Pakistan, startups have raised over $200 million in the last 5 years. But interestingly, and this is based off research that we've released with Invest to Innovate, our sister entity, only about 3% of that has actually gone to female founded or co-founded companies. The thing that's also really interesting is that a lot of women-led companies have mostly raised really, really early stage capitals, and mostly not from institutional VCs. And so when you observe that, actually in Pakistan right now, no female-led company is actually fully raised a Series A right now, which the market is still really new generally for startups, but it actually speaks to a lot of the barriers that exist for women-led companies that are raising capital right now. And it's actually also one of the reasons why my partner Misbah and I, launching a VC fund, we don't just invest in female-led companies, but we are very mindful and intentional about what inclusion looks like when we really think about being activists in building our pipeline for female-led companies. But just as a quick example, we've done a lot of work under the Women's Entrepreneurial Finance Initiative, WEFI, which is a big secretariat that is supported through the World Bank and the IFC around the world. And we're currently implementing a number of projects on our sister entity, which does a lot of entrepreneurship support work in Pakistan. But one thing that was really interesting is that, based off of this data that we gathered on women-led companies and the barriers that they had for raising funding, a lot of the work that we did to design a program to actually challenge that and to really, really change the status quo and move the needle on that was really designed from the lens of like, why is this happening? Not just, let's fix the problem. It's really kind of going deep into the issue of why aren't more women raising capital? And there was a few reasons why, and what we can talk about more of that later. But I think the two major reasons was that a lot of women-led companies we were seeing were investment worthy, but not investment ready. So not really being able to close the gap of what it meant to actually raise capital. And the other issue was that a lot of the capital that was available in the Pakistan market, not every female-led company, not every company also is ready for venture, right? And if that's all that's available to you, a lot of women-led companies that are really not only deserving, but really need that type of capital allocation will not be able to raise from the opportunities or the options that are in front of them. And so a lot of the work that we've done on that program design has really been both on how do we diversify the network of funders that exist for women, and then also on the side of how do we actually get more female-led companies to be investment ready.
Yeah, Kalsoom, that's great there in terms of just really laying the land in terms of where we are, and it's shocking that we're at the stage where there's still no Series A female-led company, and a lot there to unravel in terms of where we need to head towards. But you bring up a lot of insight into being inclusive and really building your capital behind a mission. And I want to turn to Kathryn. in Canada. Canada has had a great reputation of really being focused on doing more in building a feminist driven country, to think about the gender lens. And when we approached you to make a pledge to the $1 billion Fund for Women, part of Beyond the Billion, which is a global consortium of venture funds and LPs, LP investors into those funds that have said, yes, we're going to pledge beyond $1 billion to its female founded companies, you didn't hesitate. For those who are, tuning into this and may not be as familiar as we are, we live and breathe it. Why invest in women, and how have you built this behind your mission?
Yeah, so thanks, Sarah. We at Amplify Capital, we are not a gender-focused fund. We invest in impact companies, so companies solving for clean tech, health, and education for the future. But like, every good investor, we're looking for the best team to execute. And I think as a female managed fund, and right now 75% of our team is female, we don't have that ingrained bias, systematic bias, when we look at founders. So we look at women the same way we look at male founders. And so I think by being an asset manager and allocating capital as a woman, I'm automatically treating everyone more equal. And I don't have, those biases. So today in Fund 2, 30% of our portfolio is actually 50% of our portfolio, sorry, just as of yesterday, 50% of our portfolio is female CEOs.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And one of them we funded in December in April she went on her mat leave. And so we, as women, as a mother, I understand, what women are capable of and what they deserve and what makes sense. And business doesn't stop just because, you're on mat leave. And what I know as a woman, what I see in other female founders and female entrepreneurs is that, we work just as hard, if not harder. Our DNA is just simply different. We're experts at multitasking, sometimes to disadvantage, but we have different DNA, and I think it's truly complementary to build teams that have gender equality or gender diversification, plus racial diversification and others, all sorts of diversification, to be the best possible investors. As a venture capital fund, we are looking at investing for the future. We have to take an opinion of what that future looks like. And I can't think of a better group to understand what the future is going to look like than a gender, racial, also generational diverse team, to really understand, what's the future going to look like and what should we be investing to get there. So really, that is our investment thesis is all kind of tied into that. And when we look at the future of health, the future of education, and the future of climate, we look at customers, suppliers, policies, and how that affects all constituents, including women, and how they're going to interact in this future as a buyer or a funder in these industries.
Yeah. So Kathryn, you bring up a couple of points. The fact that, investing in women is just the smart thing to do, because this reflects the future, right? It is reflective of our population. It's reflective of what the markets are, consumers from a supply and so demand standpoint as well. And also you repeat again and again, the double repetition there intended, with the fact that you want to invest in the best, and the best does include women, and we can't exclude 50%, 51% of the population. But yet the numbers are abysmal, as you and I know. And of course, many of our funds, part of the strategy of Beyond the Billion is to ensure that this becomes a mainstream topic, right? That not all our funds are gender lens, but they are funds that are investing across AI, blockchain, clean tech, fintech, across stages, early stage to late stage, and so happen to find great female founders. But yet the numbers are still 3%. We've taken 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and COVID-19 numbers have dropped significantly for women teams. So how do you sort of tie that together, and how do you ensure if a question that I get asked a lot is, if money follows opportunity, and if they are really the best founders that are diverse, Why isn't this reflected in the current funding?
Because they don't present themselves always in the way that investors are used to. So I'll share some specific female, I don't want to call them flaws, but just the way women present themselves and promote themselves. So one is, and I'll include myself in this, we're not as aggressive in our forecasts as our male peers. So we tend to be more realistic, cautiously optimistic. And what happens is usually we beat our forecasts and our projections, and maybe our male peers don't. So, but on the surface, when we're fundraising, you can kind of see the difference. Women, I think overall are great at being coachable, but sometimes we get so much advice. I'll include myself. We get so much advice. We don't know who to listen to. Sometimes it's conflicting, and we don't have the same confidence to say, actually, no, this is the route I'm going. I think I've finally found that, but it's been 25 years, or maybe I found it 5 years ago, but it took, decades to get the confidence to say, actually, I know what I'm doing, and I've got this vision, and I need advice here, here, and here, and so we see that in the women that are able to attract capital, they're confident in what they know, and they're confident in what they don't know. And so they don't let anyone shake them on, actually, this is my area of expertise. I know this, but I'm looking for you for A, B, and C. And so those are the women that get the funding. And then during COVID, frankly, as a parent, I'm so lucky. I have a partner that has been incredibly supportive of my business, but not everybody has that. And so women we know have has taken more of the share of the burden of COVID with kids at home and multiple duties. And so, that's just, if you can spend less time in front of your computer, unfortunately you're going to suffer. But, the women that are building teams and not just leaving it to themselves to support them, will get the funding that they need. And then another thing I'll say, about women is just, the way we present, the tone of our voice, some of the messages that are meaningful to us, as it pertains to the business and the future business vision may not resonate with a traditional investor, but it will resonate with a female investor. So going back to kind of, we believe in the future, no woman should go without a sanitary pad access, right? Or, something like it's just, there's a whole host of women's issues that traditional investors have difficulty wrapping their heads around. And so it's, what do we do about it? I try to coach women on, bringing forth that confidence, on communicating their messages maybe slightly differently. It's a work in progress. And I think in Canada, there is a real effort on investing in female founders. We're seeing it from the BDC. We're seeing it from institutions that have now this, gender focus, but we need to invest more in asset managers who can allocate that capital. The gap I'm seeing right now is investing in female founders is still coming primarily from male allocators. And they might be just checking the box versus, looking for the real value prop.
Yeah. And Kathryn, just, share with us some stats here. What's the landscape for Canada in terms of female founders?
I don't know. I don't know. I would say, last I saw, I think it was about 15%, 10 to 15% of female founders are getting funded of all venture capital. But I don't have the stat on the top of my head. I think what we're seeing is more and more women coming to market, raising. And I don't know if you read in the paper, in the Globe and Mail yesterday, Joanna Griffiths, who's CEO of Nix Wear. Nix is a women's, start off as as an underwear line, very, I'll say, women body friendly, women body acceptance. So the kind of going against the Victoria's Secret image. Right. And Joanna Griffiths raised $50 million while she was pregnant. Wow. And any investor that questioned the pregnancy and her ability to continue to run the company post-investment just was removed from all conversations.
Yeah, love it.
So
And yeah, I think the numbers, speak to what we're seeing globally as well. Of course, more jarring in certain regions. But now I want to pick up from the point that you brought up there, which I know Harriet will have a lot to talk about because we had a little bit of a debate about this as well. This point on confidence, and Harvard did a study of when women pitch and men pitch, it's the same sort of concept of when you put a curtain in front of the person that's auditioning for an orchestra, the bias is taken out from that. But I personally am always careful about blaming the woman and how there's real systemic issues here. There's real biases here. And Harriet, I want to turn to you on this topic. You're CEO of an important mission, with the Chamber of Commerce here. How are women faring, and what do you think needs to be done more? How do you see women presenting themselves? Do you agree with what Kathryn is saying here?
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting to hear that from her perspective because, when you do so much work in one region, you tend to assume that that's the only thing that happens in that region, and you don't realize it actually spreads right across. So I've got, vast experience with that. I run an organization called Her Story Matters, and with Her Story Matters, what we started out as just sharing women's stories and really creating awareness with regards to societal injustice that happens to women and all of that. So it was just meant to be an organization that shares women's stories and creates awareness. And as I was doing that, I was really amazed by how many issues that women face and how it has a domino effect in other areas in their lives, which led me to do other things that I didn't intend to do. And one of those things was to start empowering women in areas of leadership, because I saw that the government here in the United Kingdom had changed policies to include more women in areas of leadership and was creating more space for women in business. And yet we were not seeing those numbers increase. So I was thinking, why are those numbers not increasing? And when we went back to the work that we were doing, we found out that there were so many issues that women were facing which affected their confidence. So where people were saying, well, women don't have confidence in pitching, that was not necessarily the case. So we have culture, we have tradition, we have how women are brought up. So I don't know about your regions, but I know when we're dealing with African women or ethnic women in the households, when there's girls and there's boys, girls are taught to be more sacrificing. You're taught to allow the boys to have this. You're taught to not put yourself first. You're taught to kind of like be a shadow. And these women grow up and they have all these degrees, they're amazing at what they do, and then they enter their field of work, and you ask the same woman to go and negotiate for a pay rise. How is she going to do that when she's been taught to put herself second? You put the same woman to go and pitch her business, and obviously she's not going to have the confidence, because number one, she's been told that she's not supposed to shine. She's supposed to sacrifice. That's the word that they use. Women are giving, women are nurturing, women allow. And when you're going to pitch for your business, you have to be very driven. You have to be putting yourself first. So how do you ask this particular woman to put herself first when she's pitching? So what we see as lack of confidence really is not lack of confidence. It's what they've been taught. So we interpret it as confidence, but it really isn't. It's just the way she's been brought up, and the beliefs that has been instilled in her when she's growing up. So being able to see this in that dynamic within within the UK, within other communities that we've worked with. When I went to start working within the chamber, I was really shocked because comparing men and women in areas of trade. So we were having this conversation with a very large network in West Africa. We were talking about women in business and leadership. And we had so many questions coming in, women asking about, accessing finance. When is it the right time to access finance? And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? And some of these women were scared to go for loans or to even go for venture capital. They were being told that to avoid venture capital. Now, here we are, saying to women that you need to apply for this, you need to put yourself out there, but then they're being taught not to go for venture capital. I found this very fascinating. And what I realized was, on top of how women have been brought up, they've been misinformed. they've been told you don't go for loans. And another issue that we also saw was, which just builds up on top of that, was about 48% of women had bank accounts. This is like 20% less than men. In this day and age, you're thinking, how are you not going to have a bank account? And what we also found was that they preferred to trade in cash. This is another insane thing. So how do we expect this woman to grow her business when she's trading in cash, for instance? You will need to carry a whole lot of cash to be able to trade in bulk, right? Yeah. And then we also found that in areas where, when at the border, when men and women were trading, men had bigger bulk. They had more bulk when it came to goods, and women had smaller amounts, and they had the same opportunities. And we found this to be very, very interesting. So men obviously knew that they can access the funding, but women didn't know. And even in instances where women knew they could access the funding, you still have policies. We're going back to tradition and culture. We have policies in the banks that state that a married woman cannot have a loan without the permission of the husband. So the husband has to sign off the loan. So when we're talking about empowering women and ensuring that they have access to venture capital, we're talking about, yes, in an ideal world where everything structure-wise and systematic-wise is really leveled. But the reality really is there's some countries in Africa, there's some communities in Africa, women still need to get the okay to be able to apply for loans. And if your husband does not agree with you having a business, you're not going to be able to run a business. So when we come back to saying that women don't have the confidence, I know this is what we usually say, but it has layers to it. What we see as confidence really is issues at home. She might want to apply for it, but the husband will not okay it. So she's not going to pitch it at her level best, because obviously she knows she's not going to have the support at home. So we still have a long way when we're talking about being able to access the funds. And these are the areas that for us as a chamber, we engage with governments, we engage with institutions, and we bring this information forward, because in Africa, we have what we call the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which came in effect in January, which means that 90% of tariff in goods has been removed, which means that people can now move along borders in Africa and be able to trade. Now, if we are not careful, what appears as an opportunity might actually end up being the contributing factor in increasing or widening the gap where women become more disadvantaged and they cannot access all of these things that we want them to access: the capital, to be able to grow their business, to be able to start their businesses. And the crazy thing is 80% of Africa's revenue comes from small businesses, and 58% of that is women. So if we're not careful, the gap will get wider. We're not going to be able to shorten the time frame and the gap. We're talking about COVID right now. Most of the women were affected with COVID. When things were shut down, most of them were not able to do business. So I think it's very important to have these conversations, and also be able to, especially for us, where we have conversations with policymakers and governments, to be able to feed this back. Because if it works in other countries and it helps the different countries to grow, and the women in those communities to really be empowered and to grow the economy, because this is what Africa wants to do, to grow the economy, there's some things that they'll have to let go of. So I know, I spoke about confidence, and I went into culture and, and different things, and touched different things, but there's so many layers to this conversation. And, it's a lot deeper than just, one thing in our case anyway.
Absolutely, Harriet. And, I love how you sort of brought up the different nuances here. And although, of course, we're talking about capital raising, this all starts from a certain point, right? It starts from, as they say, the battle for women isn't only at the workplace, it's also at home, right? It's about what do we really view as equality here, and why we're coming around this, and how do we present at work. I tune into a famous relationship therapist. I think that's how she calls herself, Esther Perel. But you bring a lot of baggage with you, and I think we must be because we have this session is all about presenting to leader, the heads of government, to bring in the different layers of private sector, public sector, policy, entrepreneurship, the different roles that we all play. And now I want to turn to Kalsoom. I saw you nodding your head furiously there as Harriet was talking about, confidence and, certain roles in Pakistan, a Muslim majority country, does have, many different layers of approaching this issue as well. But tell me from what you've seen, and I know you have an amazing research arm as well, to really paint the landscape. I want to hear from you in terms of what you've seen some women do to break the rules, right? How are we innovating with eye to eye, eye to innovate in really reshaping the conversation here so that women can succeed, and maybe success is differently perceived, right? It's not about raising X amount of capital. People forget that valuations aren't everything. I think being in the US, it's easy to say, okay, you're successful because TechCrunch says you're valued at 2 billion, but then, hey, you're not making any revenue. So talk to us a little bit about Pakistan, how you're seeing people innovating and how are women breaking the rules here.
Yeah. And I mean, I was nodding furiously for both Kathryn and Harriet, because I think the sad part is a lot of these challenges exist everywhere. And so it's so universal, the challenges that we see with women. And I think what's interesting about Pakistan, to Harriet's point as well, is I see so many husband and wife founding teams actually in Pakistan, which isn't a bad thing. We've invested in 3 of them, right? And you just have to, as an investor, you have to kind of assess the dynamics there, because obviously they're going home together and also at work. And like, what does that look like? What happens? There's inherent risk if they break up. And so what does that mean? But I think it's really interesting, because I think a lot of interventions that I've witnessed, at least in Pakistan, whether it comes to anything from microfinance into the more formal finance space, oftentimes has to take a family-driven approach and not just a female approach, because I think it's really kind of saying the lens of like, if you just target women, you're not being more encompassing of the fact of that they're also going home, and how does that change the dynamics at home as well, right? And so I find that to be a really interesting phenomenon. But in Pakistan, I can state so many amazing stories. I mean, obviously, prior to us launching our VC fund, I was the founder of a company that's been in the startup ecosystem in Pakistan for 10 years. And we launched the country's first startup accelerator program in 2012. And what's interesting is that we've graduated about 50 companies, and 60% of them have been female founded or co-founded companies. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that I think is interesting is that, women, when they are given the opportunity, I mean, women break the rules all the time, but when they are given the opportunity in a space that feels safe and inclusive, you will always see them outperform their male counterparts. And I don't say that as any offense to our male colleagues or the men that have gone through our program, but I think our companies have raised close to about $10 million in funding, and about 80% of that has been by our female founded and co-founded companies, right? And I think and when we looked at like revenue drivers, all of those things. And so, and a lot of these women are moms. Some of them are single moms. And what's really interesting from a design perspective from our accelerator, I think what was so interesting, and now obviously we're participating in all of these like very strong research-driven studies around how to design more inclusive programs for women founders. But so much of it, to Kathryn's point as well, when you are women driving programs, you create inclusive programs, right? Because as a founder, but most of our team on Invest to Innovate, our sister entity, are women. And we created spaces where, from an example, like you don't have to move to a certain city to be part of our accelerator program. It would happen on the weekends. They could bring their kids with them. We would actually take care of kids while their mom was pitching, as an example. We created a lot of flexibility so that women could participate at their own pace as well. And that's also the WeFi program that we currently are implementing with the World Bank called We Raise. That's a really big part of what we did, was we really drove inclusive programming so that as many women who were breaking the rules could participate as possible. But what's really amazing, like as an example, there is a company that graduated from our program 5 years ago, Sehat Kahani. They actually just, which literally in Urdu means health story. They're a telehealth company run by 2 amazing doctors, actually. Participated in our accelerator 5 years ago, just raised a pre-series A recently. And what I love about them, right, is that they are basically addressing the issue of the fact that a lot of female doctors in Pakistan, a lot of women go to medical school, but once they start working, actually no longer practice, right? They're at home with their kids. So using technology, this idea of how to connect out of work female doctors who can actually from the comfort of their home be able to connect to patients across the country. But them being doctors themselves, they've designed a daycare situation even at their own office where women can really feel comfortable coming into work every day. And I think we have so many examples of that. And I actually, maybe because we are women running programs and women as investors, I actually never run out of examples of great women. I find it really interesting when people struggle to come up with women speakers. I'm like, only think of female speakers because that's all the amazing females that we've been surrounded with that have been part of our journey over the last decade. And as investors as well, I think that's what appeals to my partner and I too.
Yeah, Kalsoom, I love that. I think the pipeline problem, right, is something that a lot of people fall back into it, and talking about patterns and sliding back into some of these stereotypes of, there are not enough women and things like that. Kathryn, I want to get your opinion, as a female fund manager. You are onto Fund 2 now, but it's not been an easy journey. And sometimes people forget, right? Part of really our bread and butter of our work at Beyond the Billions, how can we get more women as funders, women, men, everybody to benefit female founders? But it also starts from who's backing these funds to begin with. How do we ensure that there are bigger funds that are going to over-index on diversity? Because to Kalsoom's point, again, not to offend anyone, and I don't think anyone should take offense of this, but it is reality that diversity is a performance criteria, right? I think we're seeing that in boardrooms, in companies and portfolio companies, we're seeing it outperformance from 23 to 63%, depending on which research you go to, First Round Capital, Mass Challenge, BCG. We've seen this over and over again. Kathryn, talk to us a little bit about, your experience in really building that asset allocation piece and really being that check writer. What have you faced with? How are LPs thinking about, even with the lens of impact? Is there a common misconception potentially is that, women, they all do impact, right? And that might not actually make a lot of money. What do you say to that?
Lots of questions in there, Sarah. So I'll try to address them all. They're in Canada, I'll say, I do feel there's a bit of an impact bias. Traditional investors, traditional asset allocators, large LPs are looking at this as, can you really make money in impact? So we have to kind of jump through that hoop. And as an investor, it's double the work for them and it's double the work for us, but we feel it leads to better returns, and it's the future investment thesis that I think we should all be considering. So there is a bit of bias, I think, on impact. So we have to help investors get over that hump with statistics and stories and all that. So definitely on that side. And then in terms of thinking about, their female allocation, what we're starting to see is that there's a lot of talk on allocating to female fund managers. But there's not a lot of action. And so a lot of the press from some of the institutions have allocated to one or maybe two female fund managers, but not a host. And sometimes those female fund managers are already very well established. These institutions are just kind of following the train of others. And so the conversation, I think, needs to shift to, to back women, you can't just back one. You have to back a bunch of us. And I talk about this with impact investing too, I was on the phone with one of the larger Canadian foundations today, Canadian foundations. And I said, look, to build a robust impact ecosystem, impact investment ecosystem, you have to fund multiple funds. And I say the same thing about women. Right now, there's a bit of competition between female fund managers because we know large institutions are only going to back one or two. And just like we invested in 7 to 8 vaccines, you need to invest in a dozen, female fund managers. And the same way, in our fund, we're not just going to back one female entrepreneur, we're going to back a dozen. So it's to create an ecosystem where we can allow for learnings and success stories and potential failures and all the rest. We have to build cohorts and get the numbers up. It applies to our portfolio of female run companies, and it applies to asset allocators. And it's really important for funds. I was talking to Andre Elise at Cycle Capital about this, who is the general partner at Cycle. She said women have to be part of the decision makers at the funds, at the asset allocators. And so if you have a female partner, but she's not part of the decisions on where the assets are being allocated to, then it's just you're just checking a box, right, for some GP that's looking for a statistic. And so what can we do about it? We have to, I think we continue to show the statistics on gender diversity as just good business, number one, and then start sharing the stories specifically about female founders who, and I'm sure Harriet and Kalsoom, you've heard these stories too, but just a couple of weeks ago, a female founder said to me, "It's so refreshing to speak to you, Kathryn, because you speak to me differently than the male investors. And you understand me differently, and you're not suggesting that I get help when I don't need help in that particular area." And men, sometimes they can't help it, right? To the story Harriet told, they were just brought up differently. And we just have we interact differently, and we can invest and support these women differently. And I think the diversity of bringing multiple genders and race investors is just as important as building a diverse portfolio of those CEOs as well.
Absolutely, Kathryn. I think that's a point that we want to take home as well. The fact that, you can't just check the box and say that and we've heard this before, the female bucket is taken, right? The bucket of money for females, and then the bucket of money for people of color is taken. And then you're competing amongst yourselves. And we actually see this right behind closed doors. Won't name names here, but, some of the largest institutions can fall into that trap of, okay, I'm going to try. And then guess what? Because you only had one chance, I've had people come back to me and say, I invested into one female founder and she actually didn't do well. And, the question back to him is, how about your other male startups that have failed, right? Are you going to stop investing into male startups completely? And I think that's a disconnect, even as we continue to talk about our performance, we need to realize that, hey, startups to begin with, it is a risky business, right? 90% of startups fail. But what you want to do is continue to support diversity, because all of us bring different lens. I think we're talking about gender to start here. But of course, you bring up, from even just societal expectations, right? How you grew up culturally and all these different things. We come to the best decisions by bringing different lens and the unique networks that we all bring. So definitely an important point there of not just going into checking the box. And also I did want to highlight, Kathryn, you talked about this, but the fact that an established GP, the general partner and investor, might be, quick to get the allocation, but it might be harder for those, many of us, who are women, people of color, because we've not been part of the system to get the track record. Right, the traditional, you talk about presenting yourself, the traditional expectation of, oh, you've had 10 years, 15 years in a bigger firm and this is a spinoff. But if we're not even in those rooms, how do we even begin? It's like getting the intern who's applying for an internship to have a lot of job experience, right? So I think those are very important points that you bring up there. Now I have a question that it's time to turn to the audience questions, and I have quite a few here coming up. First one, and I do want to point this to Harriet, because you work with public and private sector. The question is, there's been much talk about alternative finance, green finance, Islamic finance, digital currencies. To what extent does this provide opportunities for women to scale and not just start and internationalize their business? Harriet.
So I just want to thank you so much for that question, because it's very important. What we've had to do in Africa is we've had to really be very agile. So what works in different countries when it comes to venture capital, it just doesn't work in Africa. So what we do is we, as a chamber, what we do is we have set up different initiatives, different projects, and what we do within those projects. So for instance, there would be funding for, green initiatives. And then we would have women within our network who are going for, or who are thinking, or who have projects within that sector. So what we would do as a chamber is approach the institutions on their behalf and get that funding and help them with it. Because if they apply for that funding on themselves, by themselves, sorry, they will not be able to receive it. So we've had to be very creative and very agile, because Africa, as you know, is, some of the structures are simply not there. We've had to create the structures to be able to help, different communities and different women to run their projects. And what we've also found is that there is a lot of capital available, especially now, for women. There's a huge focus with women and women-led businesses. So there's so much capital for women to access, but they don't have that information, or they do not, their business is not to a point where they can actually have that money, or they simply do not have the skill set to be able to access that money. So what we're doing is we're setting up entrepreneurship centers across Africa to be able to solve this this huge problem and be able to help the women and train these women up, because if they don't get those skills, they will not be able to access the funding that is available already. There's huge pockets of money available that women just don't know about it. So we've had to be very, very agile in being able to access that funding and distribute it amongst the women. So, I would go and pitch to one of you amazing ladies about my idea and get the funding, I cannot do that in Africa, because number one, they do not have that information, or their business is not up to scale to be able to do that. So we help them get their business there, and we access the funding for them, and we help distribute the funding. So we've had to be very agile as a chamber to be able to do that. So, we adopt. We've learned to adopt to everything.
Yeah, and definitely agility there, and being, I think, hyper local is important. And Kalsoom, I did want to also get your view here. I mean, you talked about just being creative. What this question points to is, are there alternative structures that have been interesting? Maybe Islamic finance, given Pakistan's nature as well. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment much on Islamic finance, but I do know that in terms of alternative models of investment. So again, not everyone needs venture capital or should take venture capital. And to your point earlier, Sarah, I think a lot of times our metrics of success, or what we see as glamorous entrepreneurship, are the people that are in TechCrunch that had these crazy valuations. But you can be an extremely profitable, healthy company where an injection of venture capital will not be the best fit for you. And so I think what's been really interesting with this We Raise program that we've been running is also this idea of introducing opportunities like revenue-based financing and educating female-led companies around that. Venture debt as a different kinds of instrument. And so also, given the fact that a lot of startup ecosystems and markets that are emerging right now, oftentimes venture tends to be the very first thing that comes up, because that's where, if you get like one home run, obviously that returns and brings back the fund for you. But bringing in alternative models of investment, I think, is much more inclusive for the kinds of businesses, female or male-led, that I think are coming up in these ecosystems. So I think from a supply and demand perspective, it's really important to think about like what we're giving on a supply side to match the demand that's also very diverse and different, and also what we're deeming as success and worthy, because I think that's really important as well, that if a female-led company can't raise venture, that doesn't mean that she's not worthy of investment. It just might mean that she's worthy of a different type of investment. And I think that level of education, to even Harriet's point, it's the reason why as a VC fund, why having this sister entity that does entrepreneurship support is so vital and important. It's also different from other VCs in the market, is because if we see a really great company that we love and just needs a little bit more work to get there, we don't just say no to them. We can actually send them somewhere to get them to the support that they need, and track them and provide additional advisory support as well, and then be able to invest in them when they are ready in that way. So I think that for us feels a lot more supportive of companies, rather than just turning people away just because they may not be ready for us yet.
I just want to jump on that. I think the accelerators in Canada and the US, we call them accelerators, are a really important part of the ecosystem, and helping companies that are not there yet, not venture ready yet, builds the infrastructure they need, or the milestones, or the goals, whatever it is, to be venture ready is super important. And as you were talking, I'm thinking I need to reach out to some of the local accelerators to make sure that they're gender parity on their mentorship, which is really important. But also want to echo Kalsoom's comment on not every company has to be a venture-backed company. I talk about that all the time. So I meet with lots of companies and I say, this is a great opportunity. This is a great business. It's not a venture ready company, but there's all sorts, like you can bootstrap it. You should go for debt given, the infrastructure or capital you're building, there's so many other alternative finance opportunities. VC is getting all the, the glamour, the PR right now. But these other forms of capital can be better suited for the particular business model. So I appreciate that being raised, and we should continue to have that conversation.
Yeah, love that. And it just reminds me of, I believe the company in Pakistan, Kalsoom, is Oran, where they do social financing. They put their money together and invest as a group. And we have across.
Yeah.
And they're coming up with a whole bank. Yeah, exactly.
They're building a neobank for women. I was actually thinking about them as an example too when you were speaking, because one real quick thing about Oran, which is the Rosca model and we've seen that in other markets around the world, but the Rosca model is ultimately just an entry point for other finance products for women and becoming a women's neobank and what that means. But one thing that I'll just point to with Oran, which I think is so amazing, and I love what Halima and Farwa are building there, is that they're, typically like the Rosca model has been like, more of traditional users, women that are maybe a little bit older that go to these like kiddie parties or committees and things like that. But what they've discovered with Oran is that there's a lot of Gen Z and millennial women that are just cash poor and also just don't know, to Harriet's point before, they don't know what to do with their money, right? And it's so amazing to think about just the enormous opportunity that exists when women are financially literate. So just to go off of what you said about Oran, because I was thinking about them too when everyone was speaking.
Mind meld. Next question. Now, we increasingly talk about businesses that are born global. Does emerging technology provide an opportunity to leapfrog some of the systemic and structural issues in traditional sectors? Open to all. Just unmute if you have a point of view. Kathryn.
Well, I mean, the biggest one, and I look, Harriet and Kalsoom, you could speak better to this than I can, but in Africa, no one's installing a landline, right? They went right to mobile phones. So that's, the classic leapfrog. And I think we're going to start seeing that in clean tech also, right? So you go from no energy to clean energy, right? And so that's super exciting. And then we're seeing it in education too. So really poor education to suddenly you can take online courses at Harvard Business School, for example. So we're seeing lots of leapfrogging because the cost structures are coming down so significantly and access to technology is going up. And I'll just leave it at that. But that's, for us as impact investors, we're super excited about that.
Harriet?
Definitely. I will echo that, because that's one of the things that we've seen with businesses. Some of the businesses have just gone global. They haven't really gone local because of access to technology. And also one of the things, I don't know if you're aware that, with M-Pesa, you can make transactions over the phone. So you don't really need to have a bank account. So there's some things infrastructure-wise that are very beneficial, especially for different parts in Africa. We've had to be very, very creative to be able to be able to access markets and to be able to grow the businesses. And it's something that we've seen when we're having conversations with entrepreneurs. They're not even thinking about local, they're thinking about global, because they see the opportunity. They see how they can enter markets, because technology has really leveled the playing field for everyone. And because no one really cares, as long as I can get the product, I can get the service, everything, it's very leveled at the moment. And with regards to access to foreign investment as well, and funding, and venture capital, and we're seeing also crowdfunding. So things have completely changed. I know we are saying COVID has set people back, but it has accelerated some people who really who spend so much time on technology. So
sorry, go ahead.
No, I wanted to, I know we're short on time here, and this is a prime question for you, Kalsoom, and of course, please add to that as well. But on the critical success factors for accelerators, how would you think about policy being put through the accelerators? I'm sure you can speak to that, and please comment on Harriet's earlier point too.
Sorry, policy on salary is what you said?
Policy, implementing certain policy through accelerators. So achieving, I'm assuming from this question, certain policy levers through accelerators.
Oh, accelerators. Okay. What's interesting? So I was actually literally going to talk about policy issues because I think that, so this was a good question to throw at me. Because what I was going to mention is that I think there's a lot of like really great things that are happening that technology is leapfrogging, that's creating like an increasingly borderless world. But I think government and infrastructure and frameworks can actually act as a major inhibitor of innovation, despite the fact that we are, leapfrogging so much. So in Pakistan, as an example, I think the policy environment has actually, up until the last 18 months, was very, very onerous for companies in the fintech sector, for companies that were looking to raise international capital. They could not set up a holding company abroad to easily attract capital. And what's so incredible, what I've seen happen in Pakistan is in the last 18 months, because of policy changes, we've literally seen the fintech sector just take off, right? Because we've seen, the barriers go down for licenses. We've seen the Securities and Exchange Commission set up a sandbox to allow people to set up more easily. We've allowed people can hold equity abroad and holding companies, which can attract foreign capital. And these are things that we've been saying for so long. And so it's less about, in terms of like policy interest from an accelerator perspective, I think from us, when it comes to the ecosystem as a whole. So I don't know if I'm fully addressing the question, but it is one thing that I think is a very cautionary tale, that we can be really warm and fuzzy about, the fact that we can leapfrog so much, but there's only just so much we can leapfrog with. We still have this ceiling in place. And I think that's really where good policy can take hold. But maybe I'm not fully understanding the second question.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. I mean, this question makes me think about the recent, I believe, or was it last year, IFC report, which shows that unfortunately, accelerators, which was meant to equalize the divide, didn't necessarily do that, right? Where women who exit the accelerator, you remember that, Kalsoom, ended up raising less than the male teams. And that's, it's sort of the reverse of that. And how do we think about that? How do we think about what tools are we putting out there into our markets that may create an unintended consequence?
Yeah, it's also unpacking the question of why, right? Like, why is it that women are still going out and not raising capital? And to the point that Kathryn was making before, it's like the unconscious bias exists regardless of whether women graduate from a really great program or not, right? And so it's also the reason why, like, I mean, for us in terms of a program like intervention, it was also saying like, okay, coaching is actually needed in the investment process itself, because there is such a lack of education, even when it comes to due diligence, when it comes to investor negotiation. If you are negotiating, and mostly with men across the table, like oftentimes the power dynamic is really hard for women that are negotiating, right? And so there's so much that's less policy driven and actually more just saying like, if we unpack why, a lot of it just requires additional handholding, support, and technical assistance to actually get women over the finish line to change it. So it's not enough to just graduate them and just like, from an output perspective, say like, go forth and go raise money. It's actually saying like, what are we actually doing to close the gap, and holding ourselves accountable from a program perspective to say that if we aren't closing the gap, that's actually on us. It's not on the female-led companies.
Yeah. AA to that. Well, we are coming up to time here, so I want to do a round of conclusions from each of you. For the esteemed audience that are tuning in here, we've got policymakers, we've got ecosystem champions, we've got investors who are VCs, some that are working in different structures, and some founders that are actually tuning in and working through the rough things. What would be one takeaway that you want our audience to come home with? Let's start with Kathryn.
Great. I would say, this is probably more directed at the female founders themselves, is be bold, go forth, own what you know, and, seek advice for the areas that you need help with, and get a diverse set of advisors. to really help you think through the challenges that you're facing. And don't give up. Don't give up, and yeah, go for it.
Harriet.
There's a lot to be said. I think I will speak to female founders because that's an area that I'm really passionate about, and I'll just echo what Kathryn said. Get the help that you need. Go above and beyond to get the help that you need, because there's so many people out there who are ready to help you, to really structure your idea and help you build up in any technical area, in any technical aspect of your idea, your business and everything else. And then be bold and be very courageous, because everyone else pitching has the same idea as you have. You all have the same opportunities, and I don't think that we're any less. I think we're even stronger and more diverse, and we can multi-purpose, do multiple stuff at the same time. So I think it's just to really go for it and don't really think about it.
I think I'm multi-purpose sometimes. I like that term, multifaceted, but I'm also a multi-purpose tool. I think so. Kalsoom, final words.
Yeah, so two things. The first thing for female founders, the first thing that I would say is do all the things. I think I totally echo and agree with what Harriet and Kathryn said. But also what I would say is that there are so many things that are happening that are supporting women out there, which I think sometimes can create a world where we can rest on just being women, and people will put you up on all of their media and PR and things like that. So don't rest on that is my advice to you, because I think you can easily rest on the awards that you'll probably win or the accolades and things like that. If you actually want to beat the numbers that are out there, you have to execute better than everybody else, right? And you have to be focused, and you have to actually be the best. And so my advice to you is to stay curious and to really kind of just not rest on, I guess, the award stuff, which I see sometimes happen. The second thing for female investors, I really, resonated a lot. I'm new to, as we're a first-time fund manager, first-time fund with iDi Ventures. And one thing that's been really important to me is that we could have rested as well as female investors and saying that, automatically as women, we will just, be inclusive when we think about our pipeline. And I think the reality is that there is conditioning that happens to all of us, whether we are men or women, when it comes to inclusion, right? Which meant that my partner and I actually really had to interrogate our own biases as female investors and actually make sure that our pipeline, if we were to sit back and wait for a pipeline of companies to come to us, almost all of them are run by men, right? Which meant that we have to be much more activist about going out there, ensuring that we're asking the right questions, making sure that we're also not part of the problem, right? And so that's another big thing, is that my big thing is don't rest on anything. Just constantly interrogate yourself, constantly stay curious and ask questions.
Wow, great notes to end on. Staying curious, and to all of you who were curious about funding and actually taking actions to tune into this, I hope you took away a lot of gems here from being creative, being agile, thinking about how you're solving the problem intentionally and not creating unintended consequences if you're a policymaker, and really, getting deep into the heart of the issue, right? So thanks so much for all of you tuning in. Thanks for your time, Kathryn, Harriet, and Kalsoom. This was wonderful, to really get insights, really deep insights from Africa all the way to Canada. I was your host, Sarah Chen, and thanks so much for listening. You can find out more about all of us on our cards, I believe. Harriet from the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce, Kalsoom from I2I, and Kathryn from Amplify Capital. Go forth and go be bold. Thank you.
As a global communications director working with some of the biggest names in sport, I experienced burnout. And this took me on a journey to discover the creative power, the intelligence, and the wisdom of my heart. And my heart, as my inner compass, has completely transformed business into a way of being that is natural to me. And as I see other women embracing their heart's wisdom and bringing their creative power into business, it's changing the way that business is being done. And this excites me greatly. It brings more nourishment, regeneration, compassion, kindness, and they're transforming models of therapy and education and politics. And as the Dalai Lama said, women just might be the saviors of the world. And this is what excites me. As we tune into the wisdom, the creative power of our hearts, we can transform the way that business is done so it's nourishing and it's in alignment with our true nature and in harmony with the world. So what does your heart's wisdom want to create in business?
Hi, I'm Kate, VP of Communications at Dentsu in Canada. I'm so excited to be participating in the inaugural Commonwealth Women's Entrepreneurship Summit. Earlier this year, I launched a conference and mentorship program in Canada called Forging New Frontiers. And what started off as a white paper to gauge the challenges of female founders and women in business in the 21st century quickly impassioned myself to wanting to do more. And more than mentors or one-off conferences, we women need a community. A community where we can listen, share, collaborate, cheerlead, promote, and leverage resources and tools. Communities that this summit aims to continue. So let's continue to build that community. This conference is just the start.